Hey guys, Oscar here. Not a Grouch, notagrouch.com. What you're about to watch is, if you want to watch it in its entirety, I recommend it. I invite you to it. It's a conversation I have with a friend about the current state of affairs, how everything's going on, and I thought it was a good conversation to share with you guys. We started talking about it. Within a minute or two, we realized, hey, maybe we should record this. I record all my Zoom calls unless somebody asks not to be recorded. But what prompted this conversation was a post I made on Instagram, and I'll show you in just a second. Actually, I'll put it right here.
White privilege. So let me get this straight. So that means somebody has privileges over me because they're white? Really? You really believe that? I don't buy that. That's somebody that messaged me on Facebook a couple of days ago saying, because I posted the fact that I was in the military as somebody being Middle Eastern, and this person said, I really feel bad. I have to really, understand what it must feel like as a Middle Eastern man to be in the army and be judged and discriminated. And yeah, I do know, I understand I have white privileges, but I'm getting a better feeling about it lately that I have some privileges you don't have. Who made you decide that you have privileges that I don't have? Who are you to even say that? Like, seriously, let me get this straight. I came from a broken family. Parents got a divorce. Mom ran out of money, went back to Iran. I joined the army. Okay. Yes, I didn't have the fanciest life. We never lived in a house. I don't know what it is to have money, but I decided to create privileges for myself. I like good food. So I went and worked hard. I created privileges for myself. I got in an industry of financial services day before 9/11 as a Middle Eastern man. And 9/11 was caused, the last time I checked, by folks from the Middle East. And that's when I got into the industry. I didn't say, oh my gosh, let me not go sell stocks and money under management and insurance and annuities because I'm Middle Eastern. No, you don't have privileges over me because you're white. You don't. You don't have privileges over me because you're Middle Eastern. Matter of fact, on the census, it says white, African American, Native American, Pacific Islander, Asian. There is nothing in there that says Middle Eastern. And I still don't think you have privilege over me. I don't want my kids to grow up thinking, oh, they're a Syrian Armenian. They're not privileged because they're a Syrian Armenian. No. They're privileged because they're a Bet David living in America. That's the greatest privilege you have. You're living in America. What other kind of privilege do you want? So look, again, some people are not going to like what I'm saying right now, but I'll give you this other part. If you really believe and allow other people to make you believe that they have a privilege over you, you're undermining your own talents. And you're undermining, if you believe in a man upstairs, God, you're undermining the man that created you or the parents that raised you. I'm not going to do that. You don't have any privileges over me. If I outwork you, if I read more books than you, if I improve myself, if I get the right strategies, if I'm able to last a long time because I have stamina and I don't fatigue early, I get to win. That is my privilege. Even though this guy looks like this with a nose that's pointy, how many big noses you see like this, and ears like this, I am privileged. You're not privileged. So no. Don't feel bad for this privileged guy. I choose my privileges, not my skin color. My work ethic does, my desire to learn does, my desire to come up with better strategies and constantly last a long time. That's how my privilege came my way, not because of my skin color. So again, no, I don't believe in white privileges.
Within a short amount of time, I received a response from my friend, say, hey, let me give you a different perspective. And he gave me a long written perspective answer to the video I had posted. And I thought, hey, this is worth talking about it instead of just going back and forth in a chat. So I gave him a quick response and I said, hey, do you want to have a quick Zoom chat? He said yes. And after an hour or so back and forth, we figured out a good time and we fired it off. When I first started talking to him, I turned off the recording because I know the topic was sensitive and I didn't want him to be concerned with what I would do with the recording or anything like that. And we got to talking, and after a few minutes, we realized, hey, you know what? He actually mentioned, hey, if you want to record this, let's do this. So I started the recording, and kind of gave a quick introduction, which is what you'll see now. And then ended up talking for, I think, either just under 2 hours or just over 2 hours. But I feel like it was a productive conversation, fruitful, very nuanced in some ways, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had by many people. When I see my Facebook feed, it is so inflammatory, so aggressive. People are fighting each other about what turns out to be, most of the times, a misunderstanding of meaningful words. And I think that you'll find most people are like Sam and I, somewhere pretty close to the middle. At least that's how I felt in the conversation. You be the judge. And without further ado, here it is. Kind of do a quick intro just to say, uh, so Sam,
Cool.
we were just talking about this, and I haven't talked to you in a couple of years, but we met at Affiliate Summit. We have a lot of things in common, and one of them is being an entrepreneur, digital marketing and stuff. So we kind of talked a little bit about that. But everywhere in the world right now, we're seeing some sort of unrest and division. I don't know. That's maybe not the best terms to use, but there's a lot of tension between people. And I made a comment. I posted a story today from the guy from Valuetainment, Patrick Bet David. Very popular guy, has like 2.5 million subscribers. I really like the way he approaches things because I think he does it in a very objective way. And so I posted that little story. By the way, if anybody else watching, you can go see it. And then Sam was the only one that actually engaged in a conversation about it and said, hey, the gist of the conversation on the video is that we kind of make what we make out of our lives, as opposed to being subject to outside circumstances. And Sam said, hey, you know what, there's a little bit more to it from his personal experience. So then we decided to have this Zoom call and kind of just talk about it. So this is completely friendly. I'm not debating anybody. I want to hear Sam's side, and maybe Sam has some things that I don't know about, and I can learn about. So, Sam, why did you tell me? Actually, if you want to say something, go ahead, and then we'll get into it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Oscar, as well, for even being open enough to have that chat. And I think that's the first thing as well. It's like on both sides, because I've seen it done badly on both sides. It's just being open, and it's not necessarily because someone says something that you don't agree with. It's not necessarily, oh, let's go and attack them because they're racist, or no, it's just like, I believe in having conversation, and I don't necessarily believe that I'm always right. Even though people tell me I'm stubborn, but I think I'm okay with getting things wrong sometimes. One of my mottos is, to forgive myself for making mistakes, and knowing that you're not always going to be right. So, firstly, thank you for having this chat and being open about it. I've watched Patrick's channel as well. I think it's Valuetainment. I'm not like a huge fan, not necessarily because the content isn't great, because the content is great, but it's just it's not necessarily a channel I watch a lot because I've only stumbled across it recently.
Okay.
But I did watch that video he did about just about the whole surrounding the whole George Floyd, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, did you see the whiteboard one that he did?
The whiteboard one.
Yeah.
And I'll agree. I think that he's very good at just kind of just telling the facts from his perspective anyway, and not being too opinionated, and just giving just saying what's going on and allowing you to come up with your own, make your own mind up, basically. I think the Instagram post that you put up, I agree with. I actually don't disagree with it in any sense. I think that from where I came from, especially, I was definitely ruled out in a lot of sense. Not necessarily just because of my ethnicity, but more just because of my background, where I came from. I'm from an area called Peckham in South London, which is kind of it's renowned basically for a lot of gang crime. I used to have to, just to go to the store, I used to put my phone in my sock and walk to the store, because often you get stopped on your way to the store and searched for your phone, because in them days they would like to steal people's phones, and
Sure.
there's a lot of drugs being sold, and a lot of my peers that were neighbors and school friends um, didn't make it out. So they might be serving life sentences and so on and so
Okay.
forth. But I am not in that situation. I'm an entrepreneur, um, built a very successful career despite all of the odds. So I think you can be in a kind of a, a position of less privilege and work your way to privilege, so to speak.
Sure.
But I think that there are other aspects that kind of shouldn't be at play, if that makes sense. And one of those things is how you're profiled by law enforcement.
Sure.
I think you should work for your right to be privileged. You should, if you want to be a doctor, you should have to put in the hours to do that. But I don't think that you should be more likely to be subject to kind of police brutality if you are of a specific ethnicity. And that's where I feel like kind of privilege is, well, shouldn't be at play, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're saying makes sense, and I completely agree. There shouldn't be any anything about you that you didn't choose that comes
Mm,
into play, right? Like in this case, you say ethnicity, and then where you came from. There's skin color. There's also gender. There's all kinds of things that we didn't pick, right? I didn't pick to be born where I was born. You didn't pick to be born where you were, and you didn't pick to be black. I didn't pick to be mixed. None of that, right? So, in my opinion, all that never should play into it. And of course, I I think I live that personally everywhere I go. You know, when I post
mm,
things to help people, I don't care who comes to me. What I put in when I determine if I'm going to help somebody, for example, in business, because sometimes I say, hey, I'm going to help somebody, and I try to help somebody like every couple months for free.
mm,
Let me get your business up and running. Let's get you a website. Let's get you all that. The only thing that I put into play there is whether they're putting in the work. And at the end of the day, you know, I don't really pay attention to the rest of it.
mm,
But recently I have, and I started looking, well, you know, have I been contributing to this profiling, as you call it, or unbalanced opinion of certain people, whatever? And I can honestly say no, because most of the people I've helped have been women, and have, you know, many of them are, I don't want to say the wrong thing, the wrong word, because I don't intend it in any case, but some people call people of color over here. You know, that's what
mm.
the word they use. So I don't mean to offend anybody, but that basically they're a big part of those group of people that I've helped. Um, but then at the end of the day, I see that those are the people that come through and rise. And I mean, you just made the example that you came from a bad neighborhood or bad area, and I'm trying to make it to make a bit of an analogy to what I would know here in the States, and I'm guessing it's something like East LA. I don't know if you're familiar with anything. Is that kind of like it's a bad area to go into? You don't go into unless you live there, right? Is that
Yeah,
what you?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so yeah,
definitely.
so we have areas like that here. But here, let me ask you this question. I mean, there's kind of a I don't know if it's a catch-22 or what, but you yourself to say, hey, coming from that area, I was profiled and I was maybe looked down upon until I rose above that. Is that right? Kind
Um,
of.
I think I was definitely profiled then, and there's a lot of people who I'm still friends with now, and they were profiled then, and I think I'm still profiled now, and I think um, there is that sense, especially when I when I walk into certain buildings, there's a sense of, you know, what is he doing here? So definitely in terms of like being self-employed and being at the level that I am at. I sometimes work with high profile companies here in the UK and in the US as well. And, you know, there's often that, why is he here kind of thing?
Sure.
Because I'm always like, naturally, I'm I'm the odd one out, because there's not a
Sure.
lot of people in higher management who look like me. So it's kind of different for them as well. It's a unique experience. So I think that yeah, there is an element of good in terms of where I came from, because it taught me that I have to grind and I have to have that grit.
Yeah,
So when you have to have that grit to get out of that, you kind of continue that grit and that grind to remain out of that, and also to kind of elevate and to go higher. So
sure.
from that perspective, I'm grateful for kind of being on the back foot, so to speak. But at the same time, I feel like this just because I'm an entrepreneur now, the stigma that's sometimes attached to being black, especially when I was young, a few years younger, being young and black has a very negative uh, stigma attached to it, which often, yeah, it's really difficult, and it can be very painful, especially when you know you fought so hard
Right,
to
like
overcome
you've done
that
so much.
stigma personally. Yeah, in my personal life, I fought so hard, and then you get to a stage where you're like, okay, cool, I've got money now in a legitimate way. You know, I've established myself, but you're still in certain instances being, you know, racially profiled or being spoken to a certain way because of how you look and stuff like that. So
So
yeah,
is that area that you mentioned that you come from, is that predominantly black, or is it
yeah,
mixed, and it's just, is it, so now, so how would you explain, I mean, and I could be putting words in your mouth or something, but you feel like you're not safe there. So why would you feel like you're not safe? I mean, you're a person, you know, you're black, and that's your home, and you still put your cell phone in your sock, and you know, you're preparing for a situation. So why is that? Because you are profiling a situation before you get into it, saying, hey, this may happen because I'm in this area. So how, what, you know, so what makes that okay? But if a white person did that, they may be called racist. You see what I mean? Like, I want to know, because there's like in the video from Patrick, he said, you know, we profile people every single day for different situations, but there's certain ones that seem to be really bad and certain ones that are okay. And he
mm,
uses the example of playing basketball. I don't know if you play basketball. I don't know if you play any sports, but you know, for basketball, you want the tallest, most athletic person, right? So that's the person that's going to get picked. For soccer, you know, it may be odd to look at, but if you have a Brazilian, you know, player, and then you have a Mexican player, you're probably going to pick the Brazilian one, and it's not a racist thing. It's they have a predominantly big reputation of being the best at soccer. So why would you feel that way when you go into your neighborhood or when you were walking around, if not because of a profile situation? Like
mm.
you have decided, or you came to a conclusion, whether somebody told you or it was personal experience, that this was a bad neighborhood and bad things could happen. So let me prepare for that, right? So how do you
Yeah,
explain that?
100%. I mean, it's a good point that you make. I was in well, what we call secondary school here. I think it's I'm not sure if it's high school in America.
What
But
age?
yeah, I was between the ages of 11 and 16.
Yeah, I think that's we have middle school and high school, and sometimes they're slightly different in different regions. But yeah, mostly middle and high school.
Yeah, so those were the kind of the ages that that I was basically
Sure.
when I felt the need to. So now, well, that area is kind of being redone, and there, you know, it's a lot, it's a better area, so to speak. And also just because I'm older as well, I wouldn't really get, you know, targeted, but you are kind of targeted when you're that young. You're targeted by people who are associated with gangs, who might want you to join a gang. And I think the point in which I decided to start putting my phone in my sock was because I was with my two other friends, and I didn't have a phone on me at the time, luckily enough, but I was with my two other friends, and we did get stopped by a gang on the way. Well, we've been stopped countless times, but this particular time we got stopped, and they were searching us for phones.
Sure.
And my friend had a phone, and if one of us were to not give it away, then we're fearing the altercation might lead to something more so than it
Than
needed to
just the
be.
loss of a
So,
phone, right?
yeah, so we kind of all decided, look, we don't want any trouble. Let's put the phone in the sock, and people probably won't even check there to see if we've got one. You know, and I think it wasn't necessarily being stopped by a particular group. So even though, yeah, the area was predominantly black, there were other races as well. There were Asians, there was white. So it was like, it doesn't matter who would stop you, but anyone basically could, you know, could stop you, and it could become an argument. It could become a fight. It could
Okay.
become anything. And I think one of the things, you know, a lot of people talk about systematic racism, and
I was just going to
it's a
ask you about that.
very controversial statement. It's a very controversial topic,
Yeah.
but I think, like, I don't have. I mean, I have evidence. I have evidence of some of the laws that are being passed here in the UK, and some of the things that have happened, kind of like historically, of why I believe systematic racism is a thing. But I think even just the way some of the housing is built in that area, it doesn't facilitate like healthy living. So I think you guys in America have like blocks. I think that's what they call it. The blocks, like the, you know, the in the UK we call it like council housing, like estate type housing, where you have basically loads of families. Like we're talking like
Oh, sure. Like,
maybe like
I think, are you referring to
the
like,
projects or something like that.
yeah, some people call it the project, some people call them, yeah, just it's
Yeah. So,
low income housing, I guess. But yeah, they tend to be very dense and like, 10 stories, very, very small, close knit apartments. Is that what you mean?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So stuff like that. And when you have an area like that, that's uh everyone is living together, there's a certain environment that's going to create, you know, that there's a
Sure.
certain atmosphere that's going to create, and inevitably the crime rates are just going to be higher. There's going to be more people on the streets doing things that they feel like they have to do in order to survive. So yeah, I feel like that doesn't help. And one of the things that the UK have been doing for a long time is kind of like cutting funding for like youth projects, youth organizations. All of them have basically vanished. So all of the support that was being given to these areas have been cut. So there's no help now for those areas. And so yeah, it's going to be areas that are kind of more likely to have a higher crime rate. And yeah, I'm not sure
Okay.
if I answered the question there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. Yeah. How would you, yeah, I mean, you did answer the question, and you're basically saying it wasn't necessarily a race issue. It seems like it comes down to an economic issue where this area is bad. It doesn't matter if it's Asian or white, somebody may stop you to take advantage of you. And you happen to be a target at the time because of your age. And that makes sense because you are more vulnerable. You know,
Mm,
if you were stronger and taller, bigger, or an adult, yeah, there's still targets, but a gang of teenagers, irrelevant of their skin color or anything, are obviously going to target somebody that's weaker, right? So
yeah,
that's given.
yeah,
And we see, I'm not I don't want to say like I know anything about London because I don't. All I know from the UK and Europe. I mean, I've been to Europe but not to the UK. But what I see from that, for example, from the bad portrayal of things is things that we see in the movie. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Train Spotting and stuff. So I see that there's people in all kinds of ways that are in that lifestyle of crime, and I don't see it
mm,
as a racial issue. The thing that I am a little bit, I don't want to say firm, but I'm pretty set on a way, at least in the States, that, for example, this conversation that we're having right now is because of all the tension that's happening, and that tension comes from
mm,
the murder of one guy at the hands of cops recently. And I saw a meme today, and obviously we're both familiar with the meme. We live in the world of memes, but it wasn't a funny meme. But he said the way to stop racism is by, and he's read the headline, and the headline said, a black man was killed by a black man, a black innocent man was killed by a racist white cop. And the meme was basically crossing out the colors and say, this is how you end racism. Because then if you read the headline, it just says, an innocent man was killed by a corrupt cop, right? So a part of the problem I see is that the media is elevating things, but making issues that aren't really there. And from day one, I wrote a little piece on Medium where I said, this is not a racial issue. This is a corruption issue. Because I follow this it started growing a little bit in the UK. There's some people doing it over there, but I know the laws are very different as in regards to free speech. But here in the United States, there's the First Amendment, which I'm sure you've heard of, and it guarantees 5 things: freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, religion, and freedom of the press. So there's this group of people that have been doing this for like 10 plus years, where they go out and they record anything they want from a public space. Okay, they literally take their camera, hold it up, and record. It can be a building, it can be an event, it can be a person. And invariably, the reason why they do this is to test whether the First Amendment is still being treated properly, because most of the targets of their recording are police and government buildings. So they'll go and stand outside a police station and record it, just the ins and outs. And they may sit there for 2 or 3 hours. And what happens usually is a cop will come out, sometimes several of them. And for the most part, now it's getting better. Just before this whole thing happened, the past year or two, it's been getting better because so many people are doing it. I mean, we have people doing it by the hundreds across the states. The cops would come out and say, you can't record here. This is our private facility, and you're not allowed to record, and go away, or we're going to arrest you. And the cops would basically break the boundary of them being a law enforcement officer and turn into what we jokingly call emotion enforcement officers, just because they feel like, hey, you shouldn't be recording me. Then they would escalate to that. And the thing is, always the bad cops that are in those videos are always the ones that try to assert some authority that they don't have. Whether it's like, give me your ID. We don't, in the States, you are not required to give ID to anybody for any reason other than if you're suspected of committing a crime or have committed a crime. That's it. So like if you're a cop and you stop me in the middle of the road, if you can't articulate what's called reasonable articulable suspicion, which means I think that you stole something from this bank right now and I need to see your ID right now. If they can't say that, they cannot demand your ID. But time and time and time again, we see that happening. And so when I saw this thing happen with the cops, it's like, I've seen that play over and over and over. The difference in what I've seen for the past 5 or 6 years is that that person that was on the ground with their knee in their neck has been all kinds of colors every single time I see them. I've seen women, I've seen Mexicans, I've seen Asians, I've seen Puerto Ricans, I've seen blacks, whites, all kinds, pretty evenly. The one thing that is always, always, always the common denominator is a bad cop. So I wrote that piece and I said, hey, I'm going to say my piece because I knew this was going to escalate into a big, I never thought it would escalate into the violence that we're seeing. But what I ended up posting was like, this is an issue with cops and authority where they think that they know everything. And us as a population, we are intimidated by them because, well, they're the cops, right? They're going to arrest me, put me in jail or whatever. So I must comply. And people that don't comply end up getting beat up. And, there's a lot of argument about whether George Floyd, the guy, you know his name, right? So
Yeah.
whether they say, well, he was resisting arrest and he was on drugs. And my perspective is like, that is irrelevant. He was already subdued. He was already under control. The proper protocol across the entire country is for that person to be handcuffed, stood up, and put in the back of the cop. And that's it. But that didn't happen. And that's what told me this is not a racial issue. Because that could have been me, that could have been anybody that just said something wrong to the cops, because that happens all the time. I saw another video today where some guy's recording a traffic stop and the citizen says, oh, I don't want to be recorded. Well, that's nice, and that's a nice request, but that's not his. He doesn't get to decide that, because if they're in a public space, we can record. But then the cop heard that, and then the cop got on the guy's case, and he tried to intimidate him. He walked up to him, chest up high, like bullying him. But the guy stood his ground, and he was actually able to walk out of it. But I've seen other cases where it goes wrong, and I follow this guy. His name is Big Nick South Accountability, or South County Accountability. He's from Florida, and he's a black dude, and he is amazing. He works the cops like no other, and he just basically gets on his face. But the thing is that he knows his rights. He knows the boundaries of what is right. So when I show that to people, I tell them, no, all cops are racist, or all white people are racist. I'm like, how do you explain this? Because here's a guy that handles himself, some people would say belligerently, but he's not. He's just being a little bit loud, but he's saying, no, my right is to record, and you're not going to stop me. And he'll stand up to white guys, black guys, Asian guys. It doesn't matter. He has been harassed by, obviously, all kinds of cops. So at the end of the day, I don't think this is a black white issue. And then if we go into the numbers, there's countless black people that are extremely successful. That I'm like, okay, if I wanted to model after somebody, I would want to be after them. Like, all the actors, there's businessmen, there's all kinds of people. And how do they do it? So it's an interesting discussion to have, because I wonder, like, do you feel like you have, looking at me and maybe looking, I don't know, what common friend do we have that's white? That's maybe at our level or the same. I don't know. I can't think of one, but like, do you feel like you have worked harder? You have had to work harder than your counterparts to get to where you are? Does that feel like, do you, kind of going back to the systemic racism, which we can get into it a little more, but I don't think is there, but maybe it's a matter of semantics. So do you feel like you've had to work significantly harder, not just than your peers, but than the people that are at the same level as you? So if somebody that's like successful like you, entrepreneur, maybe has a video show like you, maybe they got called in like into LinkedIn like you did to do all this stuff. If you look at that person, not the peers that you were, growing up and stuff, but the people that are at your level now, do you think they had to work less than you did to get to where they are?
I would say, I don't think there's like a generalization, but I would say yeah. And the reason why I would say yes is because I feel like I have to work to prove that I'm not the stereotype before I can then start working to prove that I'm good enough for the job. So like my experiences before I was an entrepreneur, I was kind of studying and I had part-time jobs on the side as well. And I experienced, my fair share of racism in the workplace as well. And more so just being looked down on.
Sure.
And one of the reasons why the George Floyd video touched me so much so that it compelled me to not only create a video about it, but also I had to take a week off work because it emotionally touched me so much. And the reason why it did, it was because, and this is something that's it can't be quantified,
Sure.
or it can't. There's no statistics or anything that I can use to back this up. But there's like a point in the video. It's like almost halfway through where there's almost like this smug look
Oh,
that the officer has on his face, and
yeah.
I paused it at that point because that look reminds me of looks that I used to get from higher management in a certain office job that I had whilst I was still doing my business part-time, trying to be full-time in it. And so I've seen a lot of kind of people create the comparison of the knee on George Floyd's neck, kind of symbolizing metaphorically
Sure.
what we sometimes have to experience in the workplace. And I would agree that there's racism across the board. It's not necessarily just Black people. There's people who are racist to other races as well. But I definitely recognize that look And even to the point where I had a manager at one time at work where a manager would come in and I knew she didn't like me, and I gave her absolutely no reason to not like me. She was a white lady, and obviously as a young black man, there's just stereotypes. There's just stereotypes that surround us, that is difficult to break away from. And so, yeah, she would come in and she would treat me differently to everybody else. But it's difficult to really articulate that unless someone else sees it and is able to identify it. So if I say something, then she'll just be like, "Oh, you're being crazy." And I think sometimes that's the most difficult thing that I've experienced anyway, being a black person, is trying to show people that there's a race issue. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest obstacles, is saying, wait a minute, there is a race issue. And it's hard. Sometimes it's really difficult to explain, but when the evidence is there and it's kind of on video, it's difficult to dispute. And what happened where my colleague realized there was a race issue was when my manager came and myself and my colleague were sitting next to each other. And then my manager kind of walked out, and then my colleague said to me, "Why did she speak to you like that?" And I just said to her, "Do you know what? Just don't worry about it. It's fine." Because I knew that it was a race thing.
You knew
And the
why.
reason why I knew it was a race thing was because even though she was my manager, she didn't know me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it was like a serviced office. So I think you guys probably have this in America. But basically, I was like the receptionist person.
Okay.
And I worked in a specific building, and her only job was to come in and kind of just check up on us, but more so kind of just take different clients around the building to show them possible units that they can have. So it's like different companies would work in that building. So she's kind of trying to sell the company that, that they should buy this office or whatnot. So I had no personal relationship with her. So it's not like I could have said something to her that offended her.
Sure.
She didn't interview me. So like there was no reason for her to speak to me differently or to treat me differently than any other person, because she doesn't know me. She doesn't really know any of my colleagues. But the only thing that she has to go by is that I look different. And so deep down internally, I knew it was a race issue. But the reason why I didn't say anything to my colleague is explaining that sometimes is like an uphill struggle, just trying to explain.
I can understand that.
This is a race issue. So I think looking at the, even when there is evidence there, it's still difficult to try and, prove. And I don't necessarily have anything to win or lose if to falsely say, oh, it's a race issue. Some people say, you're pulling the race card or whatnot. But so often, I kind of, well, as Black people, we just have to keep quiet about certain things, because we know that the struggle to explain what's going on is probably going to cause us just more issues than is needed. So I think I wouldn't say I necessarily agree with everything that's happening right now with regards to the Black Lives Movement.
Right.
But one of the things that I am kind of happy about is that racism, that talk is now being had and it's being brought to the forefront. And for the first time, I actually feel like I can have conversations like this without, feeling like someone's just going to say, oh, but it's not racism. It's, maybe that person just doesn't like you, or maybe you did something. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like for the first time, I'm actually being able to have this kind of conversation without it feeling out of place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It does make sense. And it kind of brings me back a little bit to part of what Patrick said on his video, but also my own part of my own experience. Like I said, I think we were not recording yet, but when I told you, I've had my own share of prejudice and for lack of a better term, racism upon me, because I was born in Mexico and I was not wealthy or anything, so it wasn't a money issue, but we had what we needed as growing up. But I was always an outcast, so I was not Mexican enough to be part of the the cliques and the groups and stuff. And then we moved here to the States. I was not white enough. I was not American enough to be part of that. And so I've always been found kind of caught up in limbo. And I had to work, harder, I think, than most of my peers. Just kind of like you said, I have to get past that bump first. Kind of like you have to get to a point where you are allowed to prove yourself first.
Mm.
And I get that. And in fact, I had a somewhat of a similar situation at one of my first jobs. I was doing what I thought was amazing work. My boss was saying it was great. My peers were saying it was great. Other directors were saying it was great. But there was this one person that was kind of a stakeholder. And my boss went in one time to talk to her, and she said, "Yeah, she really has it out for you." I'm like, "Why?" Like, I've done nothing. And this person had it out for me the whole time for almost a year until I finally confronted her. I said, "What is the problem? Like, what did I do to get this from you?" And the moment I questioned her, that was the end of it. She never mistreated me again, and she never explained herself. Nothing ever came of it. I never found out what. But another boss after that said the same thing, because when it was time for review, turns out both of the first boss that told me that because she wanted to give me a raise, and this person was fighting and say, "No, maybe it's time to let him go." And she's like, "Why? Like, he's one of the best workers." So even after I confronted her and she cooled off, a couple of years later for another review with a different boss, she said, "Yeah, she really has something against you." And I never found out, but I could only say, "Hey, it's maybe because I'm Mexican," because she wasn't. She was, white, and I don't know. Uh,
Mm.
but I always chuck that into from my personal experience, because I had it growing up, similar situations. And uh, I grew up without a dad until I was like 11, and then I had a stepdad. And my grandpa, when he was kind of the role model for me, he basically said, when people tell you, like, when people pick on you, just ignore it. Like, it is not worth anything. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Like, basically, he gave me kind of a pep talk that seems a little cliche, but basically, like, do your own thing and don't worry about what people are going to say. And I took that to heart. And every time somebody kind of bullied me or something, I thought, hey, you know what? This guy's just an idiot. I got in my good share of scuffles and fights and stuff. And as I grew older, of course, those become just verbal fights. And eventually I got to a point where I said, I can give you guys all the finger and go my own way, because I've made my own way. And the people that know me, and I know myself. So I don't need to be worried about it. But, you know, I think what you're describing, I can't say that it's not racism, because I believe that it probably is racism. But it brings me back to, like, my wife, she's Asian, and she's experienced some of this. And I have friends from all races, and they've all told me several stories the same. And I wonder, am I more open to hearing that story and not question it? Because I don't question what you're telling me. I don't believe it was something else, that the person didn't like you or anything. But am I more open because I've experienced it myself? Or is it just something that happens to everybody? And at the end of the day, there's just bad people out there. Because that's what I don't believe in the notion of systemic and institutional racism. Like, there's two semantics on that, right? So I guess if I could maybe try to define it a little bit, I guess systemic is that there are systems in place, overtly or inadvertently, that encourage racism. And then institutional is more about, there's actual laws and policies that discriminate. So, for example, South Africa apartheid, right? Like, that's institutional.
Mm.
That is, you cannot do this because you're black, or you cannot do this because you're white. So that's, to me, that's clear-cut institutional racism. While systemic might be what you were describing, like, hey, my peer, we're sitting right next to each other, and I get the shit, and they don't. So,
Mm.
but even then, like, is that person being a racist asshole, or is that institutional? Like, is that happen with every other person in authority in that company and then somewhere else. So that's the part that is so nebulous. And I can see the frustration from your part to say, look, we can't explain it because like you can't you can't understand it until you feel it. But then we have on the States, and I've kind of been quiet about this because I don't want to fight it. I don't want to argue with it. I don't want to get anybody's emotions
Mm.
riled up in a time that's sensitive for them or everybody, I think. But there's, I don't know if you've heard of a lady named Candace Owens. Have you heard of her name?
Lady who?
Candace Owens?
Yes, I have. Is that the black lady?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
have. Yeah.
yeah, so she's very conservative and she has very like she 10 times more than I believe there's no racism institutionalized. Like she says, work your ass off and you will make it. Or the opposite, the other side of that is to be a victim and claim, hey, you know what, I'm just being oppressed, that's why I can't make it. And so this is why I also don't think this whole situation is a race issue, because here's a black lady educated, but if you bring her up here in most circles right now, she's called a racist and you're called a racist. And it's like, well, but I am listening to a black voice, I am listening to her experience and what she says. And they say, well, she's the only one. But then there's literally hundreds of other black people that adhere to what she's saying, which is work your butt off. Challenges come in all sizes, colors, and for every single person. And that's why my first comment to you on our Instagram was, I hear you, but I don't think this is a uniquely black experience. But from what I understand from talking to you and a couple other friends, maybe it is, in a way that, like, I'm light brown, as you might see, but people say there's a big difference between being light brown and being black, and being, what, when, like, if you're white and light brown, or white and Italian, white and Asian, people don't see a big difference on that. But they say if you go from white to being black, they say that's a huge difference. So would you agree that there is something where it may be a personal issue, but you as a black person have it worse? Is that what you kind of telling, like, you're saying that you you know because I've shown that I have some my own experiences with race, and I have countless other friends that have it as well. But why is it black lives that are the issue, and not, why am I considered racist if I was to say all lives matter and not black lives matter? That's kind of what I'm saying.
Good question. I don't necessarily agree with the notion that saying all lives matter is racist per se, but I do believe that there are people who are racist who do use it. But
Sure.
I'm not. That's not saying that everybody who uses it is racist. Because I had this conversation with someone who was using it on Facebook. He was actually a friend of mine, and I had a conversation with him. And at the end of the conversation, he kind of like was understanding more so why that statement was offensive to some people in the context in which he was kind of using it. I think that everyone, well, a lot of non-whites probably can, speak about some sort of experience that they've had that was racist. I think what makes the black experience unique is well, at least on a large scale anyway, I know that we're disproportionately in a lot of the statistics in America are very similar to the statistics here in the UK. So we're disproportionately affected in terms of like our likelihood to die in police custody. When you look at the percentages, it's disproportionate to other races, and I think that's where it becomes an issue, because there's a big difference between being on the back foot for a job and it being a life and death issue. If an officer sees you and he's threatened by your skin color, that means he's probably more likely to taser you or to use force on you or to use a weapon on you, even when your hands are in the air. And I think that for me is where it becomes something that is is not right. That becomes when it's not okay, because all of a sudden now the color of my skin is now a weapon when I don't even have a weapon. So the video that I put out on YouTube was literally like me with my hands in the air and saying, you know, I'm unarmed. And I think there's I think there's a bill that they're trying to get passed at the moment, which is something to do with like, if you have your hands in the air and you're surrendering, then an officer will be prosecuted for something. I don't know. I just saw it on
In the
social
States?
media. I think so. Yeah, yeah. I just saw it on social media, so I'm not sure if it's hard and fast.
Sure.
But that would be something that I would see as a positive moving forward, because at least I know as a black man, or as any man, like you said, if I'm surrendering and my hands are up, please don't shoot me, you know,
Yeah,
or
and it
please
doesn't.
don't
Yeah,
tase me.
and I agree with that. And it doesn't matter if you're literally coming out of the bank with a bag of money in your hand. Like, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter. Like, you're
yeah.
giving up. You say, "Fine, you got me." Like, that's it. I completely agree. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a tough discussion because there's a statistic that is in the States. I don't know if it's reflective or similar in the UK, but um, black people make about 13% of the population in the States, and
Mm,
half of that or so, 6 to 7%, depending on how you look at it, is men, right? And so they say the statistics shows that over 45% of violent crime is committed by that 6% of men. Not all of them, of course, but by a black man. So that's disproportionately the biggest part of the crime, right? So people bring that in as a way to say, well, the reason why they're in police custody more is because they commit more crime, accounting for all the, extrapolating population. So normalizing all the statistics, it says that black people commit more crime than every other race to non-black people. And then, of course, there's the question that some people have with Black Lives Matter, where they say, look, 95% of black men are dying at the hands of black men. So how come and we had just 2 days ago, I think Chicago saw the worst crime day in like 60 years of history. And it was black men dying at the hands of black men. But we don't
mm,
hear about a lot of that in the media. So, and just for the record, like between you and me and anybody else that happens to watch this, I completely agree with Black Lives Matter as a matter of fact. But something that's happening a lot in our culture globally is what's the right word? The hijacking of our words. You have, for example, Antifa, that is supposed to be anti-fascism, but they are the most fascist group. So people that don't scratch past the surface, then they hear Antifa, and they're like, oh, they're anti-fascist. Why are you against them? Well, it's because they're violent and stuff. And so in the same way, the movement, the organization of BLM, I believe is bad. Now, if we could separate those two, I think we'd have a lot more open discussions between people, because on one side, you have people that are completely against BLM because every time they show up, there's violence. And then you have the people like you and like me that said, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And it could be that Asian lives matter, and Mexican lives matter, and white lives matter. But right now, we happen to be focusing on black lives. I get that. And I'm all for that. The problem is when we conflate both a political organizational movement and put it together with a noble term like Black Lives Matter. And I think they become muddied, and there's a lot of agendas behind the scenes that drive the division. And I think that's part of what happens. And it goes kind of back to what I was saying on that meme, remove the colors from those headlines. That would satisfy a lot of stuff, because it just doesn't incite, how you as an SEO and web guy know, just like me, that people don't go past the headline most of the time, right? They see a headline
mm.
and they immediately think they know the story, whether we're selling a course or something. And if somebody reads black man murdered by corrupt white cop, ooh, that alone just infuriates people right there. But if you said man murder by cop, then they're forced to read it. They're forced to read the story and say, okay, well, what happened? What were the facts? Oh, well, this cop went out of line, didn't follow protocol, didn't do what he was supposed to do. And yeah, the guy was committing a crime, but he still was arrested. He should have been put in the car. So we could get past that initial gut feeling reaction to say, oh, yeah, this, see, I told you all cops are racist or white cops are racist. And then people get hung up on that because they've already made up their mind. But the media, I think, is the most complicit on riling us up against each other because that's how they get clicks. We know that. We know if we want to sell a product, we got to come up with a juicy headline, right? So obviously they know that in a declining state of nobody's buying print, nobody's buying subscriptions, nobody wants to pay $6 a month to get a newspaper. They just want to get it free online. So they have to catch our attention somehow. Um,
Mm.
so I try to go through independent news channels, and the problem with that, like I just mentioned a minute ago, is I follow, for example, there's two twins that are black guys called the Hodge twins. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're called
No.
conservative twins. They're just two commentators, two black dudes that just are commentators, and they just talk about the news. There's a guy goes by ABL. I forgot his name. He's another black dude. I went through the list of stuff, and I follow what I think is a fairly balanced source of news. And I follow from the left, I follow from the right, I follow blacks, Mexicans, Asians, and some whites. And the moment I bring the black people that I follow, I get called, well, no, those are not really black people. They're being racist, and they call them all kinds of names. In the US, I'm sure they have them in the UK too, but basically they're like, you're black in skin, but you're not black in heart kind of thing. So I think that's what needs to stop. That, from my perspective. Oh, and I made a note here because you mentioned something about cops getting prosecuted and stuff about the law. So here's what I know about. I don't know what the law you're talking about, the hands up and surrendering and stuff, but here's what's so messed up about our political system in the United States, and I'm sure there's something similar in the UK. In the United States, we have a thing called qualified immunity for every government official. And what qualified immunity means is that if you are in the course of performing your duties and you make a mistake and you didn't know that was a mistake, you are pretty much absolved from any wrongdoing. Think about that. How does that work? Like,
Mm.
if you are, I don't know, a nurse and you're doing your job and you do something that you didn't know was wrong, but you kill a patient, imagine that you were completely off the hook for that. But when at the end of the day, it's just a common sense thing that you shouldn't have done. Like, hey, well, I didn't
Mm.
know that, you know, if I put a pillow over their head while I'm changing their feet socks, they're gonna suffocate. It's like, well, you didn't know that, but that's common sense. Like, you should have
Yeah.
thought about it, right? So in the same way, cops can do that. And if you watch any of the First Amendment audits that I told you about, you'll see what the First Amendment auditors do. What they do in the area what they're at, they say, look, the Constitution said in this clause, First Amendment, the Supreme Court ruled in this case, and you are not allowed to because of this clause in the law. And they'll read them to the cops. And the moment they say that, then they tell them, hey, your qualified immunity is out the window. And sometimes you'll see the cops just immediately snap out of it. Like, they know, hey, they know what that word means. And they know now they can't beat them up. They can't take their camera away. They can't do anything because this person behind the camera is educated. And
Mm.
now they're liable for prosecution, civilly and criminally. And so a lot of the movement that is happening right here that I completely support is to remove that qualified immunity. Qualified immunity should be out the window, which basically this guy that's going to trial for George Floyd could say, hey, I was just trying to restrain him. It was part of my job and he was fighting me. So I was just, and then because of that, he could get away with it. But because of qualified immunity, he could say, it was just the best I could do to restrain him. But of course, the opposite is like, no, dude, you were on him for 8 minutes. Uh, and then the other cops, and I agree that that moment that you mentioned, I know exactly what you're talking about. He had a smirk, and then he had his hand in
Mm.
his pocket, like he was like, yeah, like I am in control. Like, it was It was outrageous. And then the other cop that's standing to the side, where he tells the guy, "Look, he's talking. He's okay." You know, I don't know. And the two conservative twins that I just told you about, of course, everybody would say this on hindsight. You know, hindsight is 2020. But they said, "Look, if I would have been there, I would have pushed the cop off of him. Like I would have done something about it."
Mm.
But at the same time, like that's easy for us to say right now. Like even I would say that. Yeah, like if I see that, I'm gonna jump on the cop and get him off. But there are four other cops around there, all of them with guns, all of them already
Yeah.
violating their oath and their rights of the people. What makes you think they're not just gonna take you out in a heartbeat? Thinking,
Mm, exactly.
yeah, and they'll use that qualified immunity to say, "Hey, I didn't know if he was armed. I felt threatened for my life, so I had to shoot him." Like that's what would have happened if somebody jumped in there, which I wish somebody would have, of course, and I would have hoped that they came out safe. But like everybody was recording, but somebody could have just stepped up and done something. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have, because I'm like, hey, you guys
Mm.
are armed and you guys are so Twitch friendly in the States. Like you guys are shooting people for no reason. So they would say, oh, I felt threatened. I didn't know if you had a knife or something, and then they would have shot you. So to me, the biggest issue that stemmed out of the George Floyd thing is the corruption and the cops not being held responsible. Uh, but I guess it's opened up a discussion for this whole racism. The only problem I have with leaning on racism is that I am so surprised I'm having this conversation. You know, and we're friendly about it. Like we. I think if this is the two extremes, and this is the middle, I think we're like right here. Like I think we're
Yeah.
super close.
I,
Um,
I I would agree with that. I think it's difficult at the same time because I fully understand the outrage and I fully understand um people posting certain things online and getting completely slaughtered for it
yeah,
because I feel the same thing that a lot of people who are posting feel. And so I know that it's very easy to be the person who is the keyboard warrior and being like, oh, you're a racist, you're this and you're that. And I've been there, even during this period. My hands are not clean either. You know, I've been there and I've done that. And I think what changed the narrative for me was when a friend of mine posted something really offensive on Facebook. But I had to take a step back and say, wait a minute, but I know this person. And they wasn't I wouldn't have said that they were a racist when I saw them, you know,
right,
what's going on. And that's what made me stop in my tracks and have an actual conversation with him, and speak to him about my experiences being black.
sure,
And I think that kind of helped to change it for me. And I realized that conversation is key. And I think there definitely are people who are they're just flat out racists, you know, and they just have no time at all for people who look like me, maybe for even people who look like you. But there's just people who are just and that's not going to change.
right,
And I think uh, my understanding anyway of systematic racism or racism within laws, I believe that the US and the UK have become really, really good at being racist. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like racism, like during the times of slavery, so for America going back to like 1619, obviously it's not necessarily from the top level anyway, it's not necessarily a thing of I hate you because you're black. It's more of just an economic thing. It's more of a thing of if I can oppress you, then I remain rich. And I feel like that has not really changed too much. You know, there's countless examples in history of, you know, political leaders who have used race to win campaigns, whether they are actually racist or not. I don't think we will know, because I think, you know, it's well, they are racist, but they're more so using that because they're greedy or they're hungry for power, so they want to stir up kind of like a racist narrative,
sure. Kind of split
or at,
people.
or at least use that as a way to gain political power. We had I just speak because I think UK history is not spoken about a lot. So we kind of know about like Rosa Parks, we know about Martin Luther King, we know about, you know, the civil rights movement, in
Right.
itself, which doesn't make sense. Like, why are we fighting just for civil rights? You know, and when you think about it, that wasn't even too long ago. We're talking about like, when
Yeah.
was that? Like 1950s,
65.
1960s.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that wasn't too long ago where, you know, black people in America are fighting for basic civil rights. And in the UK as well, like sometimes we think, oh no, racism was something that happened such a long time ago. But the truth of the matter is, not only is racism still uh, very much a part of our infrastructure, but it's also like the effects of like the slave trade, they're still impacting people present day. And I think a key example of that is like the UK, like Great Britain. We only stopped paying compensation to a lot of slave traders in 2015, like compensation because of the abolition of slavery is only 2015. And a lot of the biggest banks here in the UK were founded off of the back of slavery. So the whole British economy is kind of founded upon that. And you know, when you kind of look through history and you look at the slave trade from like 16 for America was like from 1619 to about 1845 roughly. The biggest kind of economic trade was the trade of slaves, was black slaves. You know, it was big. It was financially, it was a bigger investment, and it made more money than any other trade. So obviously, when that ended, or at least legally ended anyway, that would have been a big kind of financial burden on a lot of companies that were kind of using it to fuel their economy. And I think Ava DuVernay done a really great job in her documentary 13th on
What's the
Netflix.
name?
Really great. It's a
13.
really great documentary. Yeah, and she was speaking about kind of like how the prison system has almost become the new form of slavery to kind of keep the economy going, so to speak, and how uh, prisoners are used to kind of create either cheap or free labor for certain companies. And so if you have a company or an individual who's profiting from people being imprisoned, then there's always going to be a motive for someone or some company to keep incarceration rates high. And kind of, yeah, going just briefly to UK history of racism and how it's been used and so on and so forth. Like my granddad came to the UK, which is why I'm here today,
From where?
as part of what is known as like the Windrush generation.
Okay.
So obviously Britain colonized a lot of the West Indies,
Okay.
and my granddad was from Jamaica.
Okay.
And basically, you know, Great Britain handed out kind of almost like a free pass into the UK to say, look, we need to build our economy back again, because of the back of World War II, there was a lot of buildings that were destroyed, and they basically needed people to come and they needed labor. So my granddad, as well as, you know, hundreds of thousands of other black people from the Caribbean came here, settled. But my granddad was faced with like signs on doors saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, you know, and that wasn't a long time ago. You know,
Right.
that was literally just my granddad.
Yeah, it's good to hear.
And then obviously there was laws introduced like the sus laws as well, that is kind of similar to like stop and search laws now.
Okay.
But they disproportionately impact the black community, you know, as opposed to the white community. So it means what it does is it creates more of a hostile relationship between police and the black community. Whereas simple things can happen in terms of like more integration in terms of police
Sure.
and the community, especially from a young age. You know, if police officers actually went into schools and actually built relationships with the community, then they're less likely to offend, because they actually know who their local police officers are.
Yeah.
The police officers know the community, and they're supposed to be community officers, but that's not going to happen because, you know, it's almost like the black man is supposed to be oppressed almost, you know.
Right.
So a lot of these laws are brought into place to kind of keep Black people oppressed. And the biggest, probably the biggest atrocity that I saw was, even though my granddad and, you know, all of his peers were invited here, it was only about, I think it was 3 years ago, 2015, 20, no, not 2015, 2017, when what happened was the Windrush, they call it the Windrush scandal,
Mm-hmm.
whereby they were deporting a lot of the Black people from the Caribbean who came here in 1940, you know, 19, well, the parents, a lot of the kids who came here. So there was one person who was on TV like 2 days ago. He was like documenting his experiences of this, but he came here when he was 8 years old off of the back of the Windrush, and they're trying to send all of them back home. And he hasn't been to Jamaica since he was 8 years old.
Right.
And that was off of the back of like a new law that had come out, a new immigration law and stuff like that, that only affected Black people. And he, not only were they trying to deport him, but he lost his job, he lost his house, he was imprisoned as well, treated like a prisoner because he came here at the age of 8. And this scandal hit the news, and when it hits the news, that's when it becomes, you know, like this big thing. And they done a documentary about it and put it on TV. It wasn't well advertised, but it's things like this that help me to kind of just realize, well, I always know this anyway, but it's things like this that just remind me that racism still exists. It's within the fabric of our society, and it is more subtle. It is more difficult to see. But I think not seeing it is kind of harmful, because then it kind of, to assume that it's not there means that it's not going to get fixed. So it's kind of like a I don't know, an issue with your car or something like that. If you know that it's there, then you can fix it before it gets worse.
Right.
But if you ignore that it's there, or don't believe that it's there, then over time it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I think that's where we are now, where the debate is still, is it a race issue? Is it not a race issue? Whereas the real conversation should be, how do we deal with the issue? But it feels like we have to like prove that there's an issue first, which is going to take some time, and then we can actually start dealing with the issue, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned, you went into explain to systematic racism, and I think you've explained like the Windrush scandal and a few other things. Like, that's proof to you that this is systematic, right? Like, it's embedded. So, I have yet to hear something in the States that supports it being systematic, but I'm sure there is something just like you mentioned. The one thing that I think is racist, and that is institutional, and I'm still going to get heat from this because it goes against the entire narrative, is I don't know how it works in the UK, but in the States we have what's called minimum wage. A minimum wage is, a guaranteed minimum wage, exactly. So I believe that's a racist thing, because it doesn't let people really do the work that they want to do for a free market. But that goes into my own, I'm very much about the free market, and I wish there was less government regulation in the market, because I think that would solve most of the issues. If you want to deal with me and I want to deal with you, you tell me how much you want to pay me, I accept or not, and then we move on. And now we have the government telling you how much you need to pay me, and then how much I need to work. And I think that affects people of color and poor communities a lot more than affects a wealthy community. Because, if I come from money, I'm not affected by a minimum wage. It doesn't matter. I'm going to thrive no matter what, because I have money, I have back and support. But if you are in a low economic situation, the owner at the store that might say, hey, you know what, I want to hire you to stock my fridges every morning before you go to school, but I can only pay you $2 an hour. But you'll be done in 3 hours, and at least you made a little bit of money, and now you go into your day, maybe you have another job later on. If you say, that's great, I can use the money, I can use 3 hours of work in the morning every day and make an extra few bucks, you are not allowed to get that job, and I'm not allowed to pay that job. So that is affecting those communities a lot because, well, the owner is going to say, well, I just do it myself. I'll work harder. And now you don't have a job. You don't have, it's not a lot of money, but at least you could pay for what you did and not be guaranteed to make $15 an hour for, standing around or doing very little work. So I think that affects a lot. Um, as far as laws go, I don't think there's any laws in the States, at least, that are still in effect. Let's say, it's different for a black person than it is for a non-black person. I think those might have been abolished recently, 60 years ago, but still, I think those are out. But there's always going to be people in places that are racist, right? And I don't think we're ever going to get rid of that. Kind of just going back to what Patrick said in his video, like we're always going to discriminate against the unknown, against the people that are different from us, against people that are, if we're jealous, we're gonna look down upon the people that are sort of speak above us in a way or another. And but the one thing I wanted to ask you was, what is the solution? What would you say? Hey, Sam is the dictator for the entire world right now. He's going to wave a little wand and say, this one action is going to fix it. What would that be? Like, what would be the solution to say, I mean, before you answer that, do you agree that we can never get rid of racism at an individual basis? Do you agree that that's impossible, or do you think it is possible?
I definitely think, well, I don't think it's, I don't believe it's possible.
Okay,
I think if it is possible, it would be extremely difficult. And it
sure.
would probably take generations upon generations to actually get there. But I think even like race is just one issue. We've got homophobia, we've got loads of different issues that, need to be resolved. I think in answer to your question, in terms of some of the things that we can do, some of the things are just really basic, that governments just don't do. So here, for example, like I mentioned earlier, like they're shutting down a lot of the youth clubs, which was actually helping the black community, that is kind of rifled and infested with crime for a lot of reasons that would, be difficult for me to go into now. But there are a lot of issues that are in those kind of less economically developed areas, that more funding would help to
Why?
kind of overcome that. I think as well, the key thing for me is building a really good relationship between police officers and the community. I feel like especially young people growing up, especially in those deprived areas, they should know who their local police officers are. They should know who to call when they're calling 999 and someone comes. They should at least know one person from that particular place. There should be relationships built with officers from a community level,
How do you do that?
and I think that kind of helps on both sides. That helps police officers understand the community that they're serving better, or that they're supposed to be serving better. But I feel like it also lessens the likelihood of people committing crimes as well, because
Sure.
they know the officers.
I was going to ask you two questions as you went along, but so, and I don't know if you know, or maybe like you said, it would take a really long time, and I don't want to go on and on. I would be totally up to having this more frequently too. But you said, like places that are like youth programs have been shut down and stuff. Why is that? Why has that happened? Like, and before you answer, there's something that I tell all my clients, I tell my friends, I tell anybody that's wants to discuss big issues like this. I don't know if you've heard of it, but have you heard of the Toyota management principle?
No.
The 5 whys. Have you heard of that? So Toyota, for a while, I guess, was making pretty crappy stuff, or something happened that they were making some stuff, and then a new manager came into place, and they basically developed this management system that addresses like 99% of the issues with anything, and you can transpose that into almost any system for any reason, and that is just simply to ask 5 to 7 times why. So, for example, you tell me the gyms, the public gyms for youth programs were closed. Well, the first thing is not to say, well, let's reopen them. The first thing is why. Oh, well, because we didn't have money. Why? Well, because people don't have money and they're not paying taxes because they don't have jobs. Why? Well, they don't have jobs because the factory down the street shut down. Why? And you keep going down the list, and if you go 5 to 7 levels deep, you find the root cause, and that's what needs to be addressed, in my opinion. And I discovered this maybe 15 years ago or so, and it's never failed me. The only issue with it is being honest, and sometimes people don't want to ask past second or third level because then they start realizing what they thought was the reason for something it's not, and then oh well, that then it's very hard for people to put their egos aside and say, well, like you and I said at the beginning, like you could be wrong, I could be wrong, and I'm
Mm.
totally okay with that. I've learned some things from you. And then a lot of people will say, well, if that crumbles, then we don't have this other thing that we're going after, so they won't pursue it. So that's why I kind of asked, like, why were they shut down? And maybe it's a very bigger, very much longer conversation, but it is worth
Mm.
asking, why have they gone away? I doubt that it was just somebody saying, oh, this will really get the black people, so let's take this away. I don't, I'm pretty sure that's not the reason. So there has to be some, and it kind of always comes down to the money, right? It's
Yeah.
always so.
I mean, I think it's more. I think it's more so just empathy. I don't feel like we have a government that cares enough
Okay.
about Black issues. And I feel like the Black community we know this. And we're not necessarily. I mean, we want as much support from the government as possible because obviously we're still a minority. We're a minority in the UK. We're a minority in the US. So we're always going to be limited in terms of what we can do from a funding perspective to kind of help to raise ourselves and to kind of solve some of the issues that are within our own community. And I just feel like the government don't care.
So, but what I mean, so somebody I watched a video recently, and I saw it before, but somebody asked Denzel Washington when Obama was still the president, and they asked him what have race relationships improved since Obama came into place, and his answer was beautiful. I thought Denzel said, "Well, you can't legislate love. You can't legislate caring, right? Empathy cannot legislate. You can't make that happen. So the thing that will fix that is like you and I having this conversation, you going to your whatever it's called over there, city council, and talking to that owner, to not owner, to the head sitting of the community or whatever, and then having coffee with them. Somewhere here in the States in the past few years, I don't know how it's been going on right now, but they started a thing called coffee with a cop,
mm,
which kind of reinforces what you were mentioning right now. It basically every morning, not every morning, but like once a week, most cities, I don't know if it's most cities actually, a lot of the cities, at least around where I live, the different city precincts and stuff would go to a coffee shop and come and hang out with a cop. And it was basically to ask them questions. And uh, I think that was building that community. And at the end of the day, that's government, but I think government needs to be local more so than, some person in
yeah.
parliament or the president to wave a thing and say, oh, now everybody get along. It's like, no, you have to make that happen. And so I don't know that the government doesn't care or does care as much as I don't think they can do anything about it other than remove actual laws that specifically target a group of people, right? So
Mm.
that's kind of what I would say to that. It's like you you and your friends and you and your relationships are going to fix this. Me and talking to people, and uh, I pulled that from the conversation a little bit on Facebook because a couple of people that I asked, and the reason why I answered very short and I say, hey, do you want to have a chat, is because of that. I didn't want to go into a back and forth because you don't get to see my face, you don't get to hear my tone. I could
Yeah,
say
yeah,
something. I could say something that basically doesn't explain my point of view, and then you think, oh no,
in the best
Oscar
light.
didn't get it, and then it's over, and then that's it. And then at the same time, like people are not willing to have that because prior to you, I said the same thing to three people. I said, hey, give me a call. Like they have my number. Oh no, that's okay. You're not going to change your mind. I'm like, well, but let me tell me what, because I don't want to argue with you over chat.
Mm.
Chat has no emotion. There's no nothing, right? So basically, I think that the way that we fix it is by having these conversations. And um, Denzel basically said, yeah, like talk to each other, hang out. Like that's how you talk. That's how you fix
Yeah.
things. And someone else, are you on TikTok at all? Do you use TikTok yet?
Yeah, not
Oh yeah, that's right.
aggressively. But
You had some songs in there, I think, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. You have a pretty good voice too, by the way.
Thank
But
you.
I saw somebody in there saying, hey, if you want to fix these issues, go to meetups that are primarily the other race and hang out with them and get to know them because cultural differences will be like normal, and that's what makes people nervous or scared, or hey, how come they do it that way, how come they do this, how come they do that. And it's like if you don't know the culture, all you see is the surface level as to why they do something, and then that creates fear because obviously we always fear something we don't know, right? So
Mm.
um, so that was the one question I was going to ask you, why. And then the other one, uh, you said, oh, I was going to say how, but I think that's the same thing. Like, how do you get the government to fix it? Like, how would they fix it? How can they
I
fix it?
I think like a good example is the statues at the moment that are being taken down in the UK. I don't know if you've heard about it, but there was a statue in Bristol of a slave trader, and that was kind of like the origins of slavery in the UK. And there was one slave trader that had his statue up, kind of like in the city centre, and there was petitions signed for it to be removed. So even today, there's still statues around, kind of glorifying people who were, heavily involved in the slave trade. And there's, been numerous petitions, people trying to, contact their local uh, councils and local governments and stuff like that to get these down. And for years and years and years, it's just been pushed back and no one's done anything about it. But off of the back of the Black Lives Matter kind of movement and the campaigns, the protesters just took it down. They literally just, done it themselves. And now the UK are kind of looking into taking some of the other ones down as well, I think, because they're kind of concerned about people trying to take it down and it being more of an issue than it could be if they just remove it themselves and put it into a museum. And I think that's just kind of like a physical representation, in my opinion anyway, of um, almost like us getting a lot of knockback. So we're saying we want to see this change, we want to see this change, we want to see this change, and nothing is done about it because the people don't care enough. So sometimes there are occasions where you just have to just take it, and
Where,
that's the only way sometimes it can be resolved. And even though I don't necessarily agree with everything that the Black Lives, everything that everyone is doing in the name of Black Lives Matter, I do believe that it is kind of giving Black people a voice, and it's creating change that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And those statues, in is definitely one thing for me anyway. That's definitely a positive change.
sure. So um, what happens next? And then what, I mean, what do you say? Where is the line drawn between don't forget your history and removing a symbol of a bad situation? Because they say if you forget the history, if you erase history, you will repeat it. So if you were to remove, say, all symbols of that, because I doubt, and I could be wrong, but I doubt that they're being used as a way to show, oh yeah, we beat them, like we're still in charge of the Black people. Like at some point, that person was revered or whatever. Now they're not, obviously. But how
Um,
can we use them for a positive thing without for example, at the bare minimum is destroying property, and so that generates a crime which fuels the other side to say, see, we told you, they're just criminals, they just want to wreak havoc. So how do you justify or explain that needs to come down, and by all means necessary, but then at the same time we don't want to be portrayed as a vandal group or a disruptor group that disregards the laws? And then also, why wouldn't it be better to say, you walk with your son down the street and there it is, and you explain, hey, this is a moment to teach history, to see this is where you've come from, this is where we are, and look at what we have today, that is, you know 2 times better, a million times better, whatever it is. How do we define, okay, what is the right way to go about that? Like, what
Yeah.
happens if that person was, when do we stop the line? Like, so that guy was a slave trader, or a big guy, right? But then maybe down the street in another city there's another person that maybe who's a banker for the slave trade, but he also gave loans to local people and made the economy great. So when do we draw the line to say, well, no, that person's okay, that monument is fine, but this one's weren't? Like, how do we define that?
I think firstly it's about listening to the people, because obviously the people in Bristol were definitely not listened to when they were doing what the right thing to do was. There were 10,000 signatures signed to get this thing down, and we're talking, like, we're not just talking recently. This has been an ongoing feud for a number of years to get this
Sure.
statue taken down. And I think there's a big difference between teaching something as history and glorifying something.
Sure.
And there would be a huge issue, I'm sure everyone would agree, if there was a statue of Hitler to be put up right now, right in the center of
Oh,
London,
absolutely. but but,
and
but we have statues of Lenin everywhere, which it was just as bad. Like Vancouver has them, Toronto has them, and they revere him, right? So is that a cultural thing? Is that a sign of the times? you know
sorry, say you broke up a little bit. So say
oh,
that
sorry.
last bit again.
I said I totally agree. Hitler is undisputable, right? Except unless you're a neo-Nazi somewhere. But they do have, for example, Lenin. There's statues of Lenin that people revere
Mm.
because of the communism front and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that's where I get the not glorifying one. And of course, yeah, it shouldn't be glorified. But how would you teach? I mean, of course, there's books and there's classes and stuff, but uh, I always feel like I'm being lectured about history, and like, oh, well, you didn't learn the right history in school because the white man wrote history. And then one question that I
Mm.
always ask uh, when I have this sort of conversation, which is rare, but like, are you familiar with the name Anthony Johnson? Have you heard of that name before?
No, I haven't.
In the context of racism and slavery? No. So he was a black man. He was the first black slave owner, and he had more slaves than almost anybody throughout his whole entire life in the States. But they don't teach that in history. So you have to learn that on your own. And that's a hard thing for people to cope with when you say, well, what about all the Irish people that were slaves? I mean, literally kept in cages like dogs in the UK and in the States. So, you know, how do we, what purpose? I mean, I get the emotional part, I guess, or the to listen to the people. And, without getting into the weeds of 10,000 signatures, what does that mean as far as the population goes? Because obviously it didn't do anything to have that signature, to the point where the community felt like they had to take it down. But
Mm.
how do we prevent a slippery slope from saying a really, really, really loud and vociferous minority is taking the rule over a mostly quiet majority? Like, how do we
Yeah.
define, like, hey, that was the right thing to do? Like, are you the arbiter to determine that was the right thing to do? Or is it the 10,000 signatures? How many people are in that area? How many people are in Bristol? Is 10,000 a significant, like, are there 25,000 people in there, or is there a million people? So we always have to be careful, I guess, with that, because to that same thing, we have the exact same thing happening right here. And it happened a few years
Mm.
ago. I think it just happened just I just saw a couple of videos of another statue getting taken down. I don't even know what it was, but I'm sure it was somebody that was leading either parts of the Civil War or against it or something. But it happens all the time. And at the end of the day, I wonder, like, what does that do? What does that really do at the end of the day? Like, if we take them all down, have we fixed it? Like, are we done with racism? Can we move on to something else? Or is it just one tiny step towards some other goal? You know?
I definitely think it's a positive step. I think it's extremely offensive, even for me personally, seeing certain statues up
Sure,
and knowing that, wait, this man was directly involved, because obviously my family come from the West Indies, so this man was directly involved in the enslavement, torture, killing and rape of my ancestors, and seeing that kind of up glorified without much historical context to it.
sure,
um I think it's very offensive to a lot of people. And I think yeah, there is a place for statues and monuments like that in museums and in history books. I don't think we should completely forget history because it's super important, but I don't think that having it, smack bam in the center, and I think that there's a lot as well, like schools and organizations that are kind of named after a lot of
right,
these slave traders because of the money that they used from slavery, helped to fund these different projects and organizations and stuff like that.
sure,
But I just feel like there's a thin line between teaching someone history and having someone up there because they're revered. And a lot of the people who are up there are actually there because they were revered, at least at the time it was put up, if that makes sense. And because of, not
yeah, no,
necessarily because of the slavery, but because of what they done after the slavery or what they used the money for in the community. But I still think that it shouldn't be there in the first place. So I think that taking it down is definitely, it doesn't solve all of the issues, but it does, in my opinion, it's a first step. At least if the government decides to take it down, it's a first step that they are acknowledging, wait a minute, these people were a part of the slave trade, and we don't back that. We're going to take these down and put them in museums.
sure. No, and I mean, I agree. Like, some of those things should definitely be removed. I'm just curious, like, when do we take things into our own hands as opposed to, like, in my opinion, I think to make that a step towards a better tomorrow would have been that the government take it down, right?
Yeah.
Because then they would have acknowledged what you're saying and be like, hey, yeah, it's time to take this away and move on. Um, but I don't know that taking it down by force helps anybody, because now the government is upset. The people that secretly wanted it to stay there are upset, and it just fuels more of the rage to the people that take it down, I think. But that could.
Maybe. I mean, this is a very selfish point of view, but when I see the images of, like, and just you just see I don't know what you call it, but the statue is gone, and I just see an image there now of no statue.
Oh, sure,
It brings a smile to my face, knowing that it was taken down.
sure.
Like,
Have they,
I I don't necessarily agree with the methods, but do I understand it? Yeah. And am I happy that it's down? Yeah. Would I change it? No.
sure.
I'm very happy.
Are there are they planning on? Have there been any talks of putting something else in place, like making it into something different now, like a, I don't know,
um
a
so what they
garden
did
or
was
something else?
they threw it into the river, I believe. So the talks now are that they're gonna take it out of the river and put it into a museum, which I think is a great thing, and that probably would never have happened if they didn't take issues into their own
Right.
hands. In terms of what they're going to replace it with, they may just leave it as it is, because that now is part of history as well. The fact that it
Sure.
was taken down,
Yeah, and how it
and
was taken down.
yeah, and even like all of the spray paint on it and everything, that is now a part of history that I feel like is important to remain there, kind of thing. So.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. I mean, no. This is. I mean, I could go on for a long time, but I mean, I've taken 2 hours of your time. I don't know how you feel about this, but uh, I've learned quite a bit from you. I think there's a lot of similar experiences in the UK and the US. Obviously, there's fundamental differences between the two countries, just in the way that they govern themselves and how, you know, our DNA, of course, us having been part of the UK at some point and then kind of say, nope, we're going to do our own thing. I think that people
Mm,
miss that part about the US where it's kind of in our DNA. And I'm an immigrant, so I'm not like, I wasn't born here. So, but I still subscribe to the idea like, hey, stand up for what's right and do what you believe to be right and fight for it till the death, basically. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing now with the Black Lives Matter stuff. It's like, hey, this is the American dream and it's ours too. I just wish we didn't have to have any violence and stuff.
mm,
And they say, well, the thing that I can't subscribe to yet is, well, we've been talking about this for a long time and we haven't been heard. And me coming in as a teenager, I don't see that as much as I hear them say that. I hear that I see black people succeeding everywhere. I see black people in positions of power. I see mostly equality. And I think what most people want to see, and this is not just black, but this is like you were saying, related to gender issues and other issues. Everybody seems to want um, equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity. And I don't know if you've heard those two terms in this context or not, but I think those are key as well. I believe that in the eyes of the law, and for the most part, you know, with the exception of some examples that you mentioned, and I'm sure there's a few examples that we can talk about in the States, maybe more than a few, but I believe that we are as equal as we have ever been, more so than we were, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Is there still work to do? I think so. You and I agree that racism itself, as a concept, as an idea, it's never going to go away, because some people will never be open to somebody that's different than they are. But what we have to be careful is to make sure that we don't favor any of those groups and go from what we perceive or we think it is, or it is institutional racism, to more institutional racism to try to correct that, right? What I don't, I've been asked to numerous times, for example, to be part of Latin business groups. Oh, come join our Latino group. I'm like, no, why? Like, why is it Latino? I come join your business group. I'll come join your entrepreneur group, but I'm not going to join a Latino group, because then that means non-Latinos are not welcome. Even if you say they are, people immediately feel excluded. So I'm always very hesitant to hear, oh, we have a women's group. Somebody started a women's group for WordPress. You're familiar with WordPress, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so there's a women's group for WordPress here, and I was invited, and people said, no, it's not just for women. You can come too. I'm like, well, yeah, but then why don't you just call it WordPress? So like, why does it have to have women in there? Well, because it's a safe space for women. I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel like that's necessary, because when I go to WordPress meetups, for example, everybody's there is even and equal, and there's speakers that are women, speakers that are men, and the same way I feel it's always hard for me to swallow when I see a qualifier in front of a group. So when I hear Black Lives Matter, I really have to work on that, because I've seen what BLM as a group does, and I also say, well, but all lives, and I get why that's offensive to some people, but my goal would be, like you said, to reduce the police force, to get communities to talk more to each other, and I think at the end of the day, money drives a lot of this, because money is food, right? Money is food and shelter. And if you don't have that, that drives you to do things that are not normally in your book of, oh, I should do this today. I should mug a guy down the street for his wallet. Like, that's not on your, in that neighborhood that you came from. If people had money to go and buy their groceries and pay their rent and stuff, they wouldn't have to do that. Like, I don't think
Mm,
people are bad by nature. I think people are good by nature, and they turn bad or tribal for a need. So um, I would love to talk more about like the
Like the
symbols, the symbols of,
categorizing. I
yeah,
feel
at some
like
point.
yeah, I feel like anyway, it's important to be associated with groups that relate to you. And the reason why I say that is I do feel like so for example, your experience, your opinions and experiences are slightly different to mine, whereas I'm definitely part of groups and my friendship circle and group as well. They kind of have a similar mindset to me. They've experienced similar things to me, and I can say things that won't be as controversial. So like the way we so I had a group meeting not too long ago with a lot of my black entrepreneur friends,
Sure,
and we just spent a lot of time just grieving,
sure.
and for people who wouldn't believe or don't believe that this is a race issue, I wouldn't be able to express how I feel and my emotions, because even though that there are people who would you know say that it's not a race issue, there are still people who truly believe it is and who are truly hurt in a unique way. Um, so for me, it was nice being in a group whereby I didn't have to justify anything. I could literally just share my raw emotions, and everybody else is sharing their emotions. And from a perspective of, I understand you, I feel the same thing, and you don't feel like, you don't feel, you know, out of place. And I think similar to women as well, women, they just go through things that we don't and that we will never understand. So I feel like having a support group of people who know what you're going through is important. And we're not often represented a lot as well, especially in the corporate world. So I often go to like work meetings and stuff like that, and not only am I the only black in the room, but oftentimes I'm the only black in the whole 300, 400 person building,
Wow.
for a lot of corporate companies. And so that is it can be quite intimidating. It can be a lot of things. And some of my other friends who are entrepreneurs as well, they experience that too.
Well,
So being able to
so
have a group where I can.
just to interrupt you for a second, the positive way to look at that too is like the best things come in small packages, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do see it as a bad thing, but I do take the positives from it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's nice to be able to have a group of people I can speak to about that, like
Yeah,
openly,
now I understand that part.
and not and not. I think there's a time to kind of have different opinions and to debate, but there's also a time to be with people who you feel like you can just relax and say what is really on your heart without
Yeah,
being judged by that. So
no, I totally agree. I was specifically talking about like public groups and stuff about that when I mentioned that. I definitely,
the Black Lives Matter.
no, 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 like not like the Black Lives Matter. Well, yeah, I mean Black Lives Matter as a group, not as a concept, not as a thing, um, but it, but that's why I brought up the other examples because I I've been asked time and time again, come and speak at this Latin, business entrepreneur group. It's like, no, I won't. I just can't because I feel like I am contributing to a division. Now, if it was like a Latino support group for business owners, and it's like, hey, we meet in private, it's kind of the purpose is what you just said, to have a place where we understand our culture and talk about that. Great.
Mm.
But the moment this is completely kind of side tangent to what we're talking about. So it's not about the Black Lives Matter, but I was asked to go to Florida to speak at a Latino conference. I'm like, this is a public conference in a huge space. It's being advertised everywhere. I just don't feel comfortable being a part of something like, hey, we have our own little group. To me, that's exclusionary and that's not inclusive of all colors and races and genders and stuff. And I feel like sometimes we inadvertently create those divisions by trying to create more balance. Say, oh, we're missing this kind of group, and then we create that group, but that group ends up being exclusive.
Yeah.
There's a foodie group around here, something like Asian professional foodies or something. I can't get in. I've applied for because they go to eat at great places, and I want to go and hang out with people and do my videos and do my recording for foodie videos. They will not allow me in. I'm married to an Asian woman, but I'm not allowed in. So,
Yeah, I mean,
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
we experienced a similar thing. Like I was part of a thing called YouTube Black.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Um,
I heard.
yeah, and it was just black creators
Yeah.
that were we were chosen to do to basically work to go to the YouTube space for a whole week.
Yes.
And that was very controversial on Twitter as
It
well.
was very much so.
And I think it was actually quite nice because it was one of the very first times ever where I'd been in a business setting where all of us were black, because I'm so used to going to business conferences and stuff like that where I'm the only black person or there's only 2 or 3 black people. So it was nice being able to actually network with people who looked like me, people who understood me, people who came from the same background as me. And I think that is what was important to me as well. Like that was the first time. And I think that there are examples. So all of my friends who they work in various different like industries. All of them, higher management is just everyone's white. There's very, very few of my friends who I know who have a higher management that is like even 20% black. It might be like one black person out of, I don't know, like 100 managers or something like that. So a lot of the people in the UK who are actually pulling the strings. So we're talking politics, we're talking higher management, we're talking media, we're talking, people who like the biggest television networks like BBC, ITV, all of them who control the media, mainly white people, and it's like, that means that there's one race that is more or less controlling the narrative of what happens across the UK.
What is more, I mean, I don't know if you know exactly or close. What is the racial breakdown in the UK? Do you know?
So I don't know it. I don't know it like extremely well. Maybe I could Google it. But I know that, okay, racial breakdown UK. So white make up 87%
Oh, wow.
of the population.
That's a big difference from here. So, and I know
Currently, this is just a random website, so it might
okay.
be, yeah, it might be around about that. But yeah, I know it's like very majority white.
Yeah. Now I know,
Yeah.
I know whenever, if I bring this up or if I question this, it sounds super cold, and I don't mean it to be like that. But if, let's take that statistic for true, so that's like 87%, right? So wouldn't that explain that out of 100 people, like almost 90 of them are white in an organization? And maybe 10 are not.
Not as much so when, for example, I went to, I'm not sure if you've heard of an organization called EY.
EY. I know one EY in the States, but I don't think that's the same.
Yeah, it's like a really huge corporate company here in the UK. So you would see a lot of black.
Is it one of the big 5? No, from the accounting.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh
yeah,
yeah, Ernst and Young. Yeah.
Yeah, Ernest Young. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I went there last year to do some project work with them,
Sure.
and a lot of the black people that you do see a lot of black people working for these organizations, but it's the position that they hold which is the issue. So a lot of the times there'll be the cleaners, there'll be the security guards, and when you get up to higher management, you don't see any of us. So I think that's where the issue lies.
So you don't see 80% white janitors. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
I see. So is this disproportionately unbalanced, not proportionally balanced? In other words, it would be normal to see, hey, there's 2 black janitors, but there's 8 white janitors, and then there's 2 black receptionists and 8 white receptionists. That would be normal. But
exactly.
what you're seeing is the opposite at the bottom of the pyramid, and as you go up, it reverses.
It becomes a lot more white. And I think Piers Morgan I'm not sure if you know about
Oh
Piers
yeah,
Morgan, but he's like a TV presenter here in the
yeah,
UK.
yeah,
He's quite controversial, but
yeah.
even he was saying like there's only one person in this studio right now. Like there's like a clip on YouTube where he's talking about there's only one black person here in this whole studio right now as we're filming. And then he's kind of speaking to the black person who is there, and he's like asking him, why is that? Why is there not
Sure.
more black people here? Why is there not more diversity here? And I think there's definitely kind of like a ceiling. And I'm obviously not saying that black people should be the majority, because we're not the majority,
Right.
in the population. But there should be a percentage at least, whether it be 10% or 20% or 15%, that are in higher management. And it's
But
just yeah, yeah.
so do you think there's some? So then there's only kind of two answers I can see as to why that is. One would be there's some insidious plot to keep you out of it, and two, it's systematic, right? So
Mm.
do you think there's a third option, or that's
I think it's a combination of both, and like racism is really subtle, but I feel like we have to start calling it where it is, and so we can get to the root of it. So obviously I'm self-employed,
yeah,
so and I have been for so many years now that I don't really face it as much as some of my peers do. But for example, my mum, who she started a managerial position in a very huge organization. I'm not going to say the name just in case it goes anywhere, but it was a very, very big organization. And they had no black managers when she became manager of that, a manager of that organization. And they actually had a meeting where they said, oh, we filled the new manager position. This lady is incredible. She's got all of the experience and everything we need. There's only one issue, and that's that she's black. And that's something that someone said in the
wow,
meeting,
with her in it,
and
like it was.
um, she wasn't in the meeting,
Oh, but
but
she.
that was the feedback. Actually, I need
Wow.
to ask. Actually, I'm not sure if she was in. I don't think she was in the meeting, but that was what was fed back to her. So I
Sure.
feel like we've become really good at knowing, being politically correct. So
Sure.
someone wouldn't say that now. Probably like this is probably like, I don't know, maybe I'm 27 now, so that was probably like 20 years ago.
Sure.
So I don't feel like someone would be as comfortable to boldly say that, especially with like social media and the rise of like mobile phones as well. Someone could be recording that could go everywhere,
Right.
you
Right.
everything. So I don't feel like it's as in your face as it was 20 years ago,
Sure.
but I do still feel like it's present.
But
And
you do think it's better today than it was 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago? Do you agree with that?
100%.
Okay.
I feel like, and I feel like a lot of the civil rights movements in America,
Yeah.
and we had a lot of similar demonstrations here in the UK. In the 90s, when my granddad came here in the 60s, there were a lot of protests in the 60s and in the 70s that led to a lot of laws being passed. The self-defense law, for example, I think it was passed in the 1970s here, off of the back of someone being racially attacked,
Mm.
a racial attack that happened in the UK, and then that law was passed because similar to now, there were like people protesting and riots going on, and then off of the back of that, new laws were passed and opinions were changed. So I feel like history seems to kind of be repeating itself. Something major happens, protests happen, and then laws are passed. So we're gradually getting
Right.
better and getting better, if that makes sense. So
Yeah. No,
yeah,
I feel like it is. If you were to, and I kind of have to wrap it up a little bit. So,
yeah,
but this is what I would ask anybody, because I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but here a lot of groups want to not only improve things for themselves. So like Black Lives Matter, for example, take that as a group, like the organization that I told you I'm against, not the concept,
mm,
but a lot of the groups say, hey, let's dismantle America and start from scratch. And to me, that's counterproductive, because those this is a question I would ask any of them. Like, okay, fine. So this is so bad, you want to throw it out the window right now. Let's pause for a second and say, and this is kind of the question for you. Not, I already know the answer because you already gave it to me. But what country and time would you pick to live if you could pick any time and place? And they always come back to it right now in the United States, or maybe in your case in the UK, because historically there's never been a better time for anybody,
Yeah.
and a better time economically, racially, all the opportunity wise. And yeah, I admit that in many ways we have a long way to go, but
Yeah.
I would not pick, 1914 Russia, you know, I wouldn't pick any other country right now.
Mm.
I wouldn't pick, you know, I wouldn't pick it like any. I don't know. Like you said, I don't know who's gonna see this later, but there isn't any other country that I can think of from all the history I've learned that I would say, no, 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 I want to be 100 years ago in that country. I just don't. Like I think this
Mm.
is the best time to be alive, technology wise, opportunity wise. I mean, you have your own business for years, and just like me, all you really need is that device in front of you, that
Yeah.
laptop, a clean background like you have, maybe your microphone if you want to be fancy, but you really, that's all you would need, and you can run that. No other time have we been able to do that. I mean, with the exception of the past 5-10 years, but 30 years ago, no, you couldn't start a business 30 years ago unless you had tons of capital, and the racial boundaries were even greater then. To say, oh, well, no, the bank's not going to lend you anything because you're black. I know
Mm.
that was the case. And then the amount of money you would need. Oh no, I need 100 grand to start a business. Right now, you need 3 grand, and you start a business. You're off to the races with a couple of grand. You start a website, buy a little bit of inventory or something, and a couple of grand, you can start a business. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know. So, I mean, would you agree that you would pick
I,
now and where you are? Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing we agree on. I mean, yeah, 100%. I think we've definitely come leaps and bounds from when my granddad was here,
Sure.
and there were signs telling him no blacks. We've definitely come a long way. So, but like you said, there's still a longer way to go. And yeah, I'm happy that we were able to have this conversation. It's
Yes.
definitely a lengthy one, which is why it's
Definitely.
gone on so long. And I thank you for that as well.
No, yeah, we're
Um,
we're clocked at 2 minutes and 15 recording, and we started like maybe 15 minutes before. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's
I
an important one to have. So I appreciate you, taking the time as well to have this chat,
I
and
I appreciate you taking it to, and then also knowing what you had to say. I've had some conversations where people are just
mm,
completely emotional, and they got upset if I ask the wrong question, and you have completely no. I mean, you know what to answer, how to answer it. Uh, I think we disagree very slightly on a few like minor details, but the big picture, I think we agree.
yeah,
And I wish more people would have this conversation. And I'm glad you were okay recording it. So uh, Zoom will process it. It'll take a little while, and as soon as it processes, I'll let you have the file. And if you want to upload it to your channel, you can. I'll upload it to mine. Do whatever you
awesome.
want with it, and then yeah, it's I think it's I think other people watching this may also understand that this
Benefit.
is something that's necessary. Um,
Yeah, definitely,
so
definitely.
I,
All right,
I
man.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate all the stuff you've told me. There's some things I didn't know that I have to look into and basically learn more, because I mean there's always something that we don't know that changes
Yeah,
perspective. Even if it's 1 degree, you get to make adjustments, and I think it's the willingness to make those adjustments that makes us better. So
100%.
thanks so much for your time, Dieter, and then we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, awesome. All right, take it easy.
Okay, talk to you soon.
All right,
Okay,
bye.
bye.